Trump's trade war is crumbling, and it's bringing his biggest enemies together. While the world watches Donald Trump escalate his tariff threats against North America, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney just pulled off a masterclass in diplomatic chess by heading to Mexico City, and what happened there should have Trump sweating bullets in the White House. We're talking about a complete realignment of North American power dynamics, with two countries that Trump thought he could bully now joining forces against him. So what exactly did Carney accomplish in Mexico, and why is this visit sending shockwaves through Washington? To understand the magnitude of what just happened, we need to rewind to how Trump's trade war started and how spectacularly it's backfiring. Trump launched his second-term trade assault with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. On February 1st, 2025, he imposed 25% tariffs on all goods from Mexico and Canada, except for Canadian oil and energy exports, which got hit with a 10% tariff. His justification? An extraordinary threat posed by illegal aliens and drugs. But here's where Trump's strategy started falling. Apart immediately, both Canada and Mexico didn't just roll over. They fought back. Canada retaliated with 25% tariffs on $30 billion worth of American goods, with plans to expand that to $155 billion. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum called Trump's tariffs a flagrant violation of the USMCA trade agreement and promised her own retaliation. But Trump's real nightmare began when he realized his tariffs weren't working as intended. By March, he was already scrambling to minimize the damage to American automotive manufacturers, exempting USMCA-compliant products until April. Then in August, he escalated again, pushing tariffs to 35% on non-USMCA goods from Canada. The problem? Trump's own trade war was costing American consumers nearly $1,300 per household in 2025, making it the largest tax hike since 1993. American businesses were screaming, supply chains were breaking down, and Trump's promise of easy trade victories was turning into an economic disaster. What makes this even more humiliating for Trump is how badly he misread the situation. Early in his trade war, some Canadian provincial premiers like Doug Ford and Danielle Smith had suggested cutting Mexico out of any new trade deal with the U.S. Trump probably thought he could exploit these divisions, playing Canada and Mexico against each other.
They had a private meeting there on the sidelines of the summit, and it seemed to go pretty well. That was a sign that Canada was making progress of kind of repairing or smoothing over some relations with Mexico that may have gotten rattled in the early days of Trump's second presidency when he imposed those tariffs, the fentanyl tariffs, on both Canada and Mexico. And then Ontario Premier Doug Ford came out and suggested that Canada should essentially drop Mexico as a trading partner and focus on a negotiation with the United States.
But his aggressive tactics had the opposite effect. The fentanyl tariffs he imposed on both countries, along with sectoral tariffs on auto, steel, aluminum, and softwood lumber, gave Canada and Mexico a common enemy and a shared reason to cooperate. Enter Mark Carney's genius move. While Trump was busy throwing economic tantrums, Carney was quietly building the coalition that would ultimately neutralize Trump's leverage. His visit to Mexico City on September 18th and 19th wasn't just diplomatic theater.
Thanks so much for joining us. U.S. President Donald Trump and his tariffs are likely to be a topic of conversation as Prime Minister Mark Carney meets with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico City. Carney departed Ottawa and arrived in Mexico early this afternoon. Sheinbaum has said the meetings with the Canadian Prime Minister are not meant to undermine their trade agreement with the U.S., known as CUSMA. Carney and Sheinbaum are expected to sign a strategic partnership agreement that will cover infrastructure, trade, security, and more. He'll also join discussions on how Canada and Mexico can work together to combat drug and firearm trafficking and other activities linked to organized crime. The trip comes as Ottawa looks for more trade with Mexico in response to the U.S. trade war. Both countries are also bracing for the renegotiation of the continental trade deal linking all three economies.
It was a strategic masterstroke that fundamentally shifted the balance of power in North America. The meeting addressed everything from trade partnerships to infrastructure development, with both countries coordinating their strategies for the upcoming renegotiation of the Continental Trade Agreement. Carney met with President Claudia Sheinbaum at the National Palace, and what emerged from those meetings should terrify anyone in Trump's trade team. The two leaders announced a new comprehensive strategic partnership that essentially creates a Canada-Mexico economic alliance independent of U.S. whims. This isn't just about trade, it's about building supply chains that bypass the United States entirely. Sheinbaum specifically mentioned strengthening trade through maritime routes that would avoid goods having to pass through the United States. Think about that for a moment. Two of America's largest trading partners are now actively working to reduce their dependence on U.S. infrastructure and markets. But here's where it gets even worse for Trump. Mexico is Canada's third largest trading partner after the U.S. and China, with nearly $56 billion in two-way trade last year. Canadian companies are already the largest foreign investors in Mexico's mining sector, accounting for almost 70% of foreign investment. What Carney accomplished in Mexico City was turning this existing relationship into a strategic weapon against Trump's trade aggression. The timing of this partnership couldn't be more devastating for Trump. The USMCA trade agreement is up for mandatory review in July 2026, and instead of facing two separate countries he could potentially divide and conquer, Trump now faces a unified Canada-Mexico front. As Nelson Wiseman, professor emeritus at the University of Toronto, put it,
okay.
Thank you.
I mean, it's a remarkable question. Of course, we are going to cooperate directly as we always have. USMCA is strength together. It's strength of the three countries together. That's what makes North America that contributes to North America be the economic envy of the world. And Canada is absolutely committed to work with both our partners. If there's opportunities to improve the agreement, we will pursue those. We can think of some. Our Mexican colleagues can. I'm sure the Americans will as well. That'll be informed by our review process. But we'll move forward together, without question. Is that unequivocal enough for you? Because if you want it...
Mexico and Canada now share a common threat from the U.S. Carney, and Sheinbaum now recognize that tag-teaming Trump may be more effective than competing for separate deals with Trump. The message is unequivocal. North America is the economic envy of the world, and that strength comes from all three countries working together, not from division. As Laura McDonald from Carleton University noted, after some 8 months of Trump, it's become clear that Canada is not better off without Mexico. Going at it separately from the Mexicans would just weaken us. The economic implications of the Canada-Mexico partnership are staggering. Mexico has multiple major ports on both coasts, Manzanillo and Lázaro Cárdenas on the Pacific, Veracruz and Altamira on the Gulf. Manzanillo alone is undergoing a major expansion that will handle 5 million containers a year by 2030, twice the volume that moves through Montreal and Vancouver combined. Mexican officials are now eager to discuss expansions of Canadian ports and the construction of dedicated facilities to support Canada-Mexico trade in goods like minerals. This infrastructure development creates permanent economic ties that will outlast any Trump presidency.
We are both undertaking massive transformations of our economy. Plan Mexico, Canada strong. Our efforts will be strengthened by working together.
Mexico and Canada want to do more on two fronts. First, work together to save North America-wide free trade by coordinating strategies for next year's review of CUSMA, the trade deal that replaced the original NAFTA 5 years ago.
How do we eliminate these tariffs that we both face prior to the end of the year so that we can have a fruitful discussion on the USMCA future beginning in 2026?
The discussions even extended to potential Mexican investment in Canadian port infrastructure and Mexico's interest in replicating Canada's healthcare system, showing how deep this cooperation could go. But Trump's failures go beyond just economics. His entire approach to North American relations has been based on the assumption that he could intimidate smaller neighbors into submission. What Carney's Mexico visit demonstrates is that Trump's bullying tactics have actually strengthened the resolve of America's neighbors to find alternatives to U.S. markets and supply chains. As Carney stated during his visit, North America is the economic envy of the world, is the most competitive economic region of the world, and part of the reason for that is the cooperation between Canada and Mexico. We complement the United States, we make them stronger. We are all stronger together. The contrast between leadership styles couldn't be more stark. While Trump threatens and blusters, Carney builds coalitions and creates lasting partnerships. While Trump's tariffs are ruled illegal by U.S. courts, with the Court of International Trade declaring his executive orders invalid as contrary to law, Carney is establishing legal, sustainable trade frameworks that will endure long after Trump leaves office. Trump's trade war has also exposed the fundamental weakness of his negotiating position. Despite his threats and tariffs, more than 75% of Canada's exports and more than 80% of Mexico's still go to the U.S. But what Carney's Mexico partnership accomplishes is creating viable alternatives that reduce this dependence over time. Every new trade route, every strengthened economic tie between Canada and Mexico represents a permanent reduction in Trump's leverage over North American trade. The announcement of nearly $10 million in Canadian funding for UN-led projects in Mexico, including migrant integration initiatives and anti-fentanyl trafficking efforts, shows how Carney is addressing Trump's stated concerns about border security through cooperation rather than confrontation. This makes Trump's tariff justifications look even more hollow and punitive. What's particularly devastating for Trump is how this partnership undermines his entire America First narrative. By pushing Canada and Mexico together, Trump has actually made America less central to North American trade and security. The new comprehensive strategic partnership includes regular leader and ministerial level meetings, creating an institutional framework for Canada-Mexico cooperation that operates completely outside U.S. influence. Trump's response to this strategic defeat has been predictably chaotic. His tariffs remain in place despite court rulings against them, his trade policies continue to face legal challenges, and his administration is scrambling to minimize damage to American industries. Meanwhile, Carney and Sheinbaum are methodically building the economic infrastructure that will make their countries less dependent on U.S. markets. The broader implications extend far beyond trade. As the three countries prepare to host the 2026 FIFA World Cup together, the Canada-Mexico partnership demonstrates that North American cooperation doesn't require U.S. leadership. Other areas of collaboration, from energy to security to climate change, could follow similar patterns, with Canada and Mexico working together while the U.S., under Trump, remains isolated by its own aggressive policies. Looking ahead to the 2026 USMCA review, Trump now faces a nightmare scenario of his own making. Instead of dealing with two separate countries he could potentially intimidate or divide, he confronts a unified Canada-Mexico alliance that has spent years building alternative economic relationships. The leverage he thought his tariffs would create has evaporated, replaced by a strengthened coalition of his neighbors who have learned they can prosper without bowing to American threats. Carney's Mexico visit represents more than successful diplomacy. It's a complete repudiation of Trump's approach to international relations. While Trump builds walls and imposes tariffs, Carney builds bridges and creates partnerships. While Trump threatens and divides, Carney unites and strengthens. The result is a North America where the United States, under Trump, is increasingly isolated by its own aggressive policies, while its neighbors grow stronger through cooperation. The ultimate irony is that Trump's trade war, designed to make America more powerful, has actually made it less influential in its own hemisphere. By pushing Canada and Mexico together, Trump has created the very coalition he should have feared most. Two economically dynamic neighbors working together to reduce their dependence on U.S. markets and create alternatives to American economic dominance. As we watch this new Canada-Mexico partnership develop, one thing is clear. Trump's tariff strategy hasn't just failed, it's backfired spectacularly. Mark Carney's visit to Mexico City marks the beginning of a new era in North American relations, one where cooperation trumps confrontation, and where Trump's America finds itself increasingly sidelined by its own neighbors. The question now isn't whether Trump's trade war will succeed. It's how much more damage it will do to American interests before it finally collapses under the weight of its own contradictions.